Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Grafton and Upton. I'm Reverend Daniel Gregoire, and I'm the minister. Welcome. Ours is a religious society whose members and friends gather to spark the spirit and the mind, to kindle loving community, and to ignite social justice in the world. Simply said, we believe in being good and helpful people, and we like to have a good time together. I would like to take you on a brief tour of our beautiful meeting house, which is what we sometimes call our church building. We gather in our sanctuary, which is our principal worship space. On Sundays, where we join with our family and our friends in celebrating the gifts and the mysteries of life. There are 5 objects in the sanctuary of special significance, and I want to call your attention to them. They are the chalice, the pulpit, the flags, the windows, and the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. This is the story of Unitarian Universalism in 5 objects. This elegant meeting house was built in 1864, but our roots go back far deeper into time. We've been here on Grafton Common even before the town of Grafton was incorporated. The first community, or congregational society, was gathered here in the winter of 1728. The roots of Unitarian Universalism are Christian, and we trace our lineage here in New England to the early Protestant dissenters known as the Puritans. These early English settlers broke away from creed and crown, leaving behind the Church of England to create something entirely different here in what they considered the New World. This commonwealth of God that they established seems very different from Unitarian Universalism today, and rightfully so. But their application of reason to faith, their commitment to democratic self-government, including in the churches, their personal piety, and their seeking freedom in belief, over the course of centuries, gave rise to all sorts of institutions and evolved into our living tradition today. Our Puritan heritage also explains the fact that many of our churches are located in the center of towns and on prominent hilltop locations. For the Puritans, religious life was central to all. During the colonial period, the General Court in Boston, which was the seat of government for all of New England, would not charter a town until a meeting house was erected and a minister called to serve as its spiritual leader. I start off here to illustrate just how rooted Unitarian Universalism is to the land, the people, and the cultural heritage of New England. This is something that we're very proud of. We will learn more about how these Puritan churches in time became Unitarian Universalists, but it's important to start here in this large and simple space. Much like visiting someone's house, you can learn a lot about a person by what they have on the walls, or by the absence of things that are fairly common. So many of our hopes and our dreams, our highest aspirations, our greatest motivations tend to be on display to the discerning eye. The same is true for our religious home, and this is our most special room, our sanctuary. So I invite you to look around. Look around, what do you see? Well, yes, there are people in the pews. These are cardboard cutouts of some of our members and friends. What else do you notice about the space? There's a large and light atmosphere here. The windows, they are clear glass. There's a high central pulpit that looks more like a desk. In this space, there is very little decoration, almost no symbols that we associate with religion. There are no crosses, there are no stars of David. Oh, look, there's an interesting candle holder. Perhaps it's a lamp of some kind. That's our chalice. There are some flags in the space, a poster in a frame. Those are our 7 principles. There are pews, and anyone can sit wherever they like. Some people have their favorite pews, and some families have sat in the same pews for generations. The pews face forward, and in them you'll find our hymn books, but other than that, there are no sacred literature. In many respects, this looks like any Protestant church building, but you will find no Bibles in this space. They are all in our library, along with the holy books of all the world's religions. There are no crosses, there are no saints, there's no stained glass. The mood and the feeling of this space is familiar but very different. And that's the point, because all are welcome here. This is a blank canvas, and you are the spiritual artist and explorer. So let's visit the objects and learn more about Unitarian Universalism. The Flaming Chalice has become the symbol of Unitarian Universalist faith gradually over time. It is often lit before the start of the Sunday worship service. This particular chalice is made of brass, and it's designed by the artist Mordecai Roth. You will notice that the chalice has two overlapping circles. The circles represent the traditions of Unitarianism and Universalism, two separate but related denominations that came together formally in 1961 to form the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. These two historically Christian denominations had distinct but complementary theologies. The Unitarians celebrated the radical unity or oneness of God. This is distinct from the Trinitarian creedalism and orthodoxy of the vast majority of Christians today. Some people describe Unitarianism as Christianity leaning back to its monotheistic roots in Judaism, and it does do that today. The Universalists embrace the doctrine of universal salvation, or final reconciliation. This was a radical position in the past, and it still is today. Universalism asserts that no one can be separated from the source of love forever, and that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine some way, somehow. Both Unitarianism and Universalism represent distinct minority views within Christendom. From before the time of the Nicene Council of 325 right down to the present day. Historically, both Unitarians and Universalists generally saw Jesus as an important, enlightened ethical teacher, an exemplar, and a prophetic leader, but not one in the same as the Creator God. As a heterodox tradition, which is to say different from the orthodoxy, Unitarianism and Universalism has sprouted and traveled throughout Europe and the British Isles independently over the course of centuries, with centers of Unitarian belief in Poland, Hungary, England, and Scotland. For the sake of this presentation, we will focus on Unitarian Universalism as a product of 19th century New England culture through to the present day. This chalice is a symbol, and so it conveys many meanings at once. It could be the light of lamps burned through the night, the love of learning and reason which is held by this community. The light could be a beacon of hope, and the delight of coming together to celebrate life. I believe that the deeper significance of the light of the chalice is safety and welcome. The chalice is largely a 20th century practice that came over from Europe after the Second World War. At that time, the Unitarian Service Committee was looking to offer meaningful assistance to survivors of that conflict, especially those fleeing Nazi persecution. And they wanted a logo to go with their correspondences that would communicate welcome to all. The Austrian refugee, Hans Deutsch, designed the logo, and it was inspired by the ancient Greek and Roman altar fires. The service committee assisted in the covert evacuation of Jews and other persecuted minorities from Europe to the United States, and the chalice symbol assisted that effort. We light the chalice now to mark our time together in the spirit of welcome that we invite to attend our time of learning together. Let's turn our attention to this elaborate mahogany table, this altar, this highest point in the room. We commonly call this the pulpit. This is where the reading and the sermon are delivered. And these are two important components of worship. Thinking of our pulpit as a desk is actually a more useful way of understanding our tradition, especially with our delight in learning together. Notice its central location, its height. This would have aided in hearing the sermon in a time before microphones and speakers. This position gives you some idea of how important the written word and the spoken word was and is to Unitarian Universalism. We can also see the importance of the speaker, too. It is usually the minister who speaks here, the religious leader of the congregation. But this desk is open to anyone of goodwill, no matter their gender or identity, whether or not they are ordained clergy. Guests in this pulpit have included leaders from the Worcester Islamic Center, the Boundless Way Zen Center, folkloric storytellers, and Christian pastors. In our tradition, the clergy are ordained by the congregation after proving themselves through years of study of sacred literature, philosophy, and theology. In the past, the minister was often raised up from among the members of the congregation. This makes sense considering how our tradition does not have any pope or bishops, no elders, or other authorities beyond the congregation. This is the essence of congregational polity, a legacy from the Puritans. In the past, a large ornate Bible would have rested on this desk, containing both Hebrew scriptures and the Christian New Testament. Today, readings are drawn upon, which the sermons are based on, come from a wide variety of sources. These sources include works of poetry and philosophy, the biographical narratives of social reformers, the insights of scientific research, as well as the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the Tanakh, and Native American spirituality, among others. Our worship services are a celebration of life, and they feature hopeful teachings or lessons based on the theme and one or more of the 7 Unitarian Universalist principles. Each sermon is a call to action by which we transform ourselves so that we can transform the world. The themes, which are decided by the minister and change from month to month, include compassion, wonder, memory, joy, longing, strength, patience, courage, and peace. The themes reach through all parts of the worship experience. They inform the music, the prayers, our children's program, which we call Religious Exploration. The themes also inform our social engagement with the community and inspire our charitable giving as a congregation. Our congregation gives away half of the Sunday morning collection to local, national, and international charities every Sunday. The theme also coincides with our important celebrations and holidays over the course of our program year, which starts in September and ends in June. The holidays celebrated here in worship include familiar ones like Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, winter solstice, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and Easter. We also mark some holidays that are unique to Unitarian Universalism. These holidays include Jazz Funeral, which is the time, usually in January, where we gather to celebrate and mark the passing of the past year with a lively funeral in the New Orleans jazz tradition. We also will mark Charles Darwin Day in some Februaries, where we celebrate the origin of the species and the theory of evolution. We have our bridging ceremony, which usually takes place in June, and it marks the passage out of our youth group, usually for high school age kids, into adulthood, and often into college or into work. We have our flower communion, which also usually takes place in June. The flower communion is a time where we invite members of our congregation to bring a flower that represents who they are and to add it to a communal vase. After the service, all of the flowers that are in the communal vase are given to another person. So each person leaves with a different flower than what they brought in, symbolizing how we all carry each other as a community. And last but not least is our water communion, which is often how we start our program year in September. Again, members and friends are invited to bring a vial of water from a place that is sacred to them. It could be from their home, a place that they've traveled to, a local stream or pond. That water is then placed in a communal bowl, and that water is used to water plants outside or saved for other occasions throughout the program year. That communal bowl, again, symbolizes all of the gifts that we pour together into our common communal bowl. These and other holidays keep me and my worship team very busy throughout the program year. And now we turn our attention to these flags. You will recognize them as the American flag, the United Nations flag, and the Gay Pride flag. The American flag is almost an obligatory piece of furniture in any large assembly hall, but the two other flags were added for a particular emphasis. While the flags are not used in the worship service, all three hold a special place here in our sanctuary, and they serve as important reminders of the commitments we make as a faith community. There are few things as uniquely American as Unitarian Universalism. Some of the founding fathers and mothers were Unitarian, including John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, among others. William Ellery Channing, the founder of American Unitarianism in 1819, inspired the Transcendentalists, whose writings defined the American spirit in the mid to late 19th century. These writers include Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller, who were all Unitarians. The ideals of Unitarianism aligns very well with the American ideal of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The United Nations flag speaks to our shared commitment to world community with liberty and justice for all. Unitarians and Universalists have supported the United Nations since its founding at the end of the Second World War. The Gay Pride flag is a somewhat recent addition to our sanctuary. It is yet another proclamation of safety and welcome. It is a clear celebration of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning siblings. Everyone, no matter who they are or who they love, is fully accepted and fully included in all aspects of congregational life, from lay leader to ordained clergy. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are included in all of our rites of passage, which include child dedication, coming of age, membership, marriage, and memorial services. These flags make me think about three really important and unique Unitarian Universalist rites of passage: child dedication, coming of age, and membership. These special times mark significant milestones in the lives of individuals in the community. Child dedications. Child dedications allow parents a chance to introduce their children to the congregation. While the focus is on the child, the emphasis is on the adults in the child's life, committing themselves to bringing out the best in that child. Child dedications do not make a child Unitarian Universalist. Quite the contrary. It means that the parents and the church will provide the child with ample opportunity to explore and the freedom to find his or her own spiritual path wherever that path might lead them. The ceremony uses a rose on a stem and a bowl of water. The rose is used to douse the child with water. It's a bit like rain falling on fertile ground. Rather than conferring any blessing upon the child, the water is summoning up the virtuous qualities already in the child, summoning them to awake and to rise to the surface. Coming of age is another rite of passage. That is when a child moves from adolescence between the ages of 13 and 16. Having made their way through our religious exploration program, they are asked to write a credo statement, which is shared with the congregation in a special worship service. The word credo is Latin for I believe, and the credo statement is a short essay that an adolescent is encouraged to write with gentle advice and questions from a mentor and the minister. The credo is their statement of belief about life, love, justice, service, death, God, not God, and their place in the cosmos. There is no expectation with regard to the content or that they identify themselves as Unitarian Universalists, but of course we hope they will. The credo statement is an adolescent's record of their free and responsible search for truth and meaning, an important snapshot of their evolving faith. Membership is joining a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Now, joining a society is something that most people do as an adult. Unfortunately, very few people who are raised Unitarian Universalists remain Unitarian Universalists into adulthood. One might imagine that being brought up with all of the freedom of belief would be a fairly compelling thing to do and would make them Unitarian Universalists. It would make our tradition fairly sticky. But I guess the differentiation process of adolescence that we must all undergo requires us to rebel against something, even if that's the thoroughgoing liberalism of our parents. That being said, a great number of people choose to come to Unitarian Universalist congregations after marriage or when they have children, especially if they are in an intercultural or biracial families, which a growing number of families in the modern era are doing. Many people from interfaith marriages, especially couples of Jewish or Roman Catholic backgrounds, often find a home here. I think it has to do with the fact that we are able to blend familiar customs, and that blending is an integral part of our tradition. Some have been put off by scandals, contradictions, and hypocrisies in their family faith traditions, and that's what brought them here. Others come because they or those that they love have been excluded from their faiths because of their beliefs or sexual orientation. One can identify as a hyphenated UU, bringing the best of one's past with them into the future, becoming a UU Christian, a UU pagan, a UU Jew. If distinctions like that are helpful to you, you can choose them. People from all walks of life and all backgrounds Choose to become Unitarian Universalists by joining with us in creating a welcoming, accepting, and non-judgmental community. This community includes seekers of truth and meaning who are eager to make a difference in the world through social action. The membership process is fairly simple and straightforward. In no particular order, a person is required to attend worship service for a period of time, to speak with the minister, to attend a class on UU history and polity, to accept the 7 principles, to make a financial contribution, to perform some act of service for the congregation and or a service to the local community, and then sign the membership book. Membership conveys the right to vote in the affairs and the business matters of the congregation in our annual meeting, another Puritan holdover, and membership allows access to rites of passage. There are over 1,000 Unitarian Universalist congregations around the country. The highest concentration is here in New England and in the Mid-Atlantic region around Washington, D.C. There are about 250,000 members of Unitarian Universalist congregations. Wow, these flags convey so much, and perhaps other flags will be added to them at some future time. Each calls us to celebrate diversity, justice, equity, and compassion in human relationships. I just love how the light pours into this sanctuary. Sun or rain, snow on the ground, each time I come here, there's a different kind of light in this space. There's something holy about the proportions of these windows and the light that they let in. These particular windows are not original to the building. They were custom designed to recall the ones that they replace. The original windows really had withstood the tests of time over the last 150 years. They were also painted shut, if you could believe that, for the last 30 of those years. Soon after I arrived to serve as minister of this congregation, a capital campaign was launched with the goal of replacing the windows so that we could worship in this sanctuary year-round, something that wasn't possible before. Members of this society raised the funds and the windows were replaced to everyone's delight. There's an old saying in the Christian New Testament that the eyes are the windows to the soul. They disclose the true character of a person and their deepest motivations. I say that these windows capture the soul and the true character of Unitarian Universalism. The Puritans, we might remember, were chief among the iconoclasts of old, both here in New England and in Old England. Even today, one can visit churches overseas where these religious zealots remove the stained glass windows and deface the statues of venerated religious figures in the ancient stone churches there in the 17th century. They did this because they were so zealous for a purified or precise religion. Here in New England, however, in this New Jerusalem, churches could be built from the ground up with the Puritan sensibilities in mind and with their fervent asceticism of that religious tradition already reflected in the design. The Puritans were Trinitarians, and as such, they were Orthodox Christians. And they were very deeply interested at getting to the heart of faith as they understood it. And they did this by chipping away at anything that seemed to get in the way of true faith. And some of their descendants kept removing impediments wherever they found them. The absence of color, ornamentation, or any distraction in these windows is purposeful. The fact that they are at eye level shows the importance of the unmediated encounter with the holy, an encounter that so many Unitarian Universalists find in the natural world. The clarity of these windows allow for the changing light of the seasons. They allow for the weather to be a part of the worship service, which for us is a celebration of life rather than an escape from it. These windows are an apt symbol for Unitarian Universalism today. The 20th century theologian, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, yes, that is his name, Forrest Church, who was the longtime minister of All Souls Church in New York City, uses the window metaphor as a description for a new Universalist theology. He wrote, "None of us are fully able to perceive the truth that shines through another person's window." And he said that our religious beliefs are, in essence, a window frame through which we mediate and filter the light of God. And this light comes to us from some far-away source out there. Now, you might be wondering to yourselves, do Unitarian Universalists even believe in God? The answer to that question depends on who you ask. Unitarian Universalists are guided by the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. Beyond that, each individual is free to come to their own conclusions, or no conclusion at all, about ultimate reality and what that means to them. Some Unitarian Universalists are theists, others are atheists. They are agnostic and pantheistic, or humanists. It depends on where they are on their lifelong spiritual journey. These and other labels, if Unitarian Universalists choose to accept them, are generally provisional and subject to change upon further investigation. Most Unitarian Universalists are not strident in their views. Instead, they take an open-minded approach and see their beliefs rather like working hypotheses rather than unchanging laws. Forrest Church gives a very generous treatment to the concept of God in Unitarian Universalism. And I want to read a direct quote of his. "God language," he writes, "can tie people into knots, of course, in part because God is not God's name. God's name refers to the highest power we can imagine. God is our name for that which is greater than all, yet present in each. For some, the highest imaginable power will be a petty, angry tribal chieftain, ensconced in the high clouds on a golden throne, visiting punishment on those who don't believe in him. For others, the highest power is love, goodness, justice, or the spirit of life itself. Each of us," he writes, "projects our own limited experience onto the cosmic screen or window in letters as big as our mind can fashion. For those of us whose vision is constricted, illiberal, or narrow-minded people, this can have horrific consequences. But for others, the magnificence of creation inspires broad imagination and sympathy, answering to the highest and best within and beyond themselves. These people, they draw lessons and find meaning so redemptive that surely it touches the divine." These are his words in the Cathedral of the World, a Universalist theology. These windows allow for so much imagination, so much creativity, sympathy. They are a gentle and a gently mediating encounter with the holy. And I'm so glad that they are here, and they're easy to maintain. Now let's consider the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalist faith. These principles are the glue that holds this great, big, clunky thing together, uniting us across theological diversity as Unitarian Universalists. This beautifully calligraphied poster is our 7 principles. These principles help us to decide who we are going to be. The 20th century African-American Unitarian and civil rights activist Whitney Young wrote these words: "Instead of an asset, religion has been a liability in the struggle for social reform. The church, until recently, anesthetized one of the major forces of social change, the American conscience. It provided people with a place where they could congregate regularly in a beautiful setting to hear pious platitudes and mouth meaningless cliches. Then it turned them loose to discriminate against their fellow humans the other 6 9/10 days of the week. The church must decide what it's going to do and what it is going to be." Those were his words. Since 1985, however, we've had these 7 principles, and these principles read thusly: "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalists, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement toward spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, and the use of democratic process within our congregations and society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, respect for the interdependent web of all life of which we are a part." It is important to remember that these 7 principles were not revealed to us by some ancient or revered teacher from antiquity. They were not carved into stone by any unseen hand or inscribed onto golden tablets somewhere here in the New World. Rather, they took their tone and shape in committees. They were written and rewritten after ample discussion and debate. They were voted on by a supermajority of delegates sent to our General Assembly, which is the annual meeting of our religious association. I read that the principles as we have them were nearly unanimously accepted when the vote came. I didn't vote at the time because I was busy being 4 years old, but I have accepted them as an important part of my life as a person of faith. They are not a creed in the way that creeds are usually understood, but they function as a kind of action statement, a flexible basis for a cosmology and a theology, and they are a rubric for moral action. Some Unitarian Universalists will recall an earlier version of the principles developed in a much more contentious process back in 1961, when the Unitarians and the Universalists first came together to form the Unitarian Universalist Association. The principles that were developed at that time were rendered obsolete by language that is understood to be sexist today. But they're not very different from the 7 principles that we currently have. And I'll read them for you. In 1961, we had, in accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Association, dedicated to the principles of a free faith, unite in seeking to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. 2, to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. 3, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. 4, to implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on the ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. 5, to serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, and to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. 6, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. Clearly, the principles that we have today are an evolution, or maybe a refinement of the principles of yesteryear. And still, there are those, much older than I am, who were raised Unitarian in this very church and elsewhere who will remember reciting, perhaps nostalgically, these words. We believe in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. For most of the 20th century, that last statement was what it meant to be Unitarian in most places. These 7 principles that we have today are how we hold ourselves and each other accountable in the beloved community that we are creating, this commonwealth of God here on earth. I tease out a few single words to help me remember the 7 principles, and I will share them with you. Dignity, justice, acceptance, searching, conscience, community, and interdependence. These are the essential values that we hold dear as Unitarian Universalists. We also have 6 sources of inspiration, also contained in this poster. Now, there's nothing special about the numbers 7 or 6. They're simply what we have right now, and they could change. These sources of our faith are mystery and wonder, the actions of prophetic people, the wisdom of the world religions, Jewish and Christian teachings, the philosophical teachings and results of science, and earth-honoring practices. Some will say that your principles and sources are too easy, that there is no real challenge in them. Anyone could believe these and probably already does. One could say that these are not really a matter of serious faith. My paternal grandmother was a pastor in the Pentecostal church, and we were very, very close. She would say to me that the Unitarian Universalists seem like very nice people who do a lot of good things, but it's not a religion. It was very hard to argue with Grandma because she was very strident in her beliefs and because she was Grandma. Maybe that's why I became a Unitarian Universalist minister. But today, I, along with most Unitarian Universalists, believe that our principles are, in fact, a matter of very, very deep faith, a faith worth living for. We are deeply committed and convicted by the transformative power of this faith in love and acceptance, a faith in humankind, onwards and upwards, forever. The uniqueness and centrality of our faith as Universalists, as Unitarian Universalists, is challenged and affirmed every day. One just needs to pick up the newspaper, or listen to the evening news, or consider the experience of the last 4 years filled with chaos, despair, and disease, to realize that accepting one's neighbor is harder than it looks, especially if they belong to a different political party. There are many people who say that they honor the dignity of every person, yet time and time again, they do things, both small and large, that dishonor, malign, or exclude people because of their perceived differences. And one does not have to go very far to see that honoring the web of life and our interdependence is a very hard value to live out in daily practice, despite our best intentions, given the array of bad choices that we have for food, for transportation, for clothing, and other consumer items. These principles, these 7 principles, are a matter of very, very deep faith, a faith that calls us again and again to transformation, acceptance, and forgiveness. These principles are special to us. And there you have it, this long and winding journey of faith, a story of a religious tradition still evolving from Puritan roots, rising up with post-Christian and humanistic branches. Our Unitarianism speaks to the radical oneness of human experience. Our Universalism seeks out the truth in its many expressions, one source and one shared destiny. This is the history of Unitarian Universalism in 5 objects, and these objects are all found at the Unitarian Universalist Society of Grafton and Upton. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to welcoming you here in person. I'm eager to show you the rest of our beautiful meeting house and to share all that we have to offer you and your family. You are invited to join us one Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, either online or in person, and I hope that you'll come. Goodbye.